This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
A spokesman from the Sadr movement said that the 6 detained individuals, including Sheikh Abdul Hadi Darraji, the head of the movement's media office, were all released. During the arrest of Darraji, one of his bodyguards was killed in the Baladiyat area east of Baghdad.
Abdul Hadi Darraji ليس مجرد عضو في التيار الصدري.
Abdel Hajj al-Darraj is not an ordinary man in the Sadr movement. He is the head of its media office and considered a prominent member. According to the Sadr movement, a joint American and Iraqi force has raided a house where al-Darraj was temporarily staying for security reasons. This home is far from his primary home. The house where he was temporarily staying is located in the eastern suburb of Baghdad. The American army avoided mentioning al-Darraj by name and said in a release that the arrested individual is the leader of an illegitimate armed group involved in kidnapping, torture, and killing of Iraqi citizens. The arrested individual was also described as the leader of different groups that target people based on their sectarian identity. The American military statement linked between the detained person, who is likely to be Abdel Hajj al-Darraj, and the so-called Abu Darrah, who is known as the leader of death squads. The bodies of unknown individuals that are found here and there almost every day are usually attributed to him. Abu Darrah is also accused of killing Iraqi and American soldiers, as well as some government officials. The government has tense relations with the Sadr movement and its al-Mahdi army, at least that is how it appears. It is said that the lukewarm relations between the U.S. and the Iraqi Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki is caused by the unwillingness of his government to be stricter with the Sadr movement. The Iraqi government has made an alliance with the Sadr movement instead of getting rid of it. When one talks about the Mahdi army, one is really talking about the Sadr movement. But the leader of this movement, Muqtada al-Sadr, denies that his militias are responsible for the violence that they have been accused of. The Sadr movement is a strong supporter to Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki, and it is one of the cornerstones of his government. This is the reason why it is embarrassing and difficult for the Iraqi government to deal with this important political movement. Perhaps the Iraqi Prime Minister can't give up his alliance with this movement and its military wing, which is believed to be behind many violent events in Iraq. This, despite American insistence that the Iraqi government isolate the Sadr movement and eliminate it.
In the U.S., members of the House of Representatives have proposed a plan asking the Bush administration to secure the approval of Congress prior to any attack against other countries. The document, drafted by Republican Representative Walter Jones and 5 other fellow congressmen, obliges President Bush to ask for the congressional blessing before he goes for military action against Iran. President Bush is under fire for his new Iraq strategy as pressures build up by both Democrats and his fellow Republicans. The heat is also on the U.S. president from the public. Recent surveys conducted by Bloomberg Institute and Los Angeles Times have shown 58% of those polled are against Bush's approaches to a global fight on terrorism. And the CEO of the U.S. Federal Reserve is warning against a financial crisis in the country. An online edition of the Financial Times wrote on Friday, Ben Bernanke has turned up the heat on the U.S. Congress to study the impacts of a rise in federal expenses on the spending package, sounding a note of alarm that hard times are on the way. The chairman of the Federal Reserve told the Senate Budget Committee the relative upturn in the monetary issues is the calm before the storm. At least 10 Iraqis were killed Friday in violence across the country, while the bodies of 17 others were found in various districts of Baghdad. 3 policemen were killed and 4 wounded during a firefight with gunmen near Iskandaria, 60 kilometers south of the Iraqi capital. Another police officer died and a colleague was wounded when a bomb exploded next to their patrol in Karwada, central Baghdad. 3 mortar rounds struck different districts of the capital, meanwhile killing 3 people and wounding 7, while a civilian was also killed in crossfire between police and insurgents near the southern district of Baya.
Today, an American military official denied the rumor that an Iranian missile was launched at a U.S. naval vessel in the Gulf. He described the rumor as untrue. Meanwhile, many Kuwaiti citizens are expressing their concerns about a possible military strike on Iran.
Kuwaitis agree that Iranian nuclear plants are a threat, especially the plant located in Bushehr, 150 kilometers away from the Kuwaiti waters, which is closer to Kuwait than Tehran. However, Kuwaitis differed on how to deal with this facility, which uses old Russian technology.
We are hearing that the United States will strike Iran. This does not reassure the Kuwaiti public. Actually, there are concerns. Thus, there needs to be a major campaign to deter this plan and stop the Iranian regime at its limits.
Others believe that this situation cannot be resolved militarily. They warn against the repercussions of waging war on Iran and the administration's attempts to draw neighboring countries in the region to support it in this.
We are allies of America, but we are not its servants. We are a country with its own sovereignty and its own viewpoint. We look out for the interests of Kuwait and its citizens, as well as the stability of the country before everything else.
As the possibility of war increases, some citizens are sending a message to the government to make realistic preparations. They confirmed that Iran's nuclear plants are not only a Kuwaiti problem, rather they are an international concern.
The government must take the necessary precautions. It must calculate for any emergency. At the international level, this is not just an issue for Kuwait alone, but it is a global issue that involves other concerned parties, not just Kuwait.
Kuwait has experienced 3 wars on its own soils in less than 20 years, and its people understand the meaning of war destruction. They also know what it means to go through a war that their countries have nothing to gain from. With the American administration's announcement of deploying more Patriot missiles in the region, the Kuwaiti public believes that the calm waters of the Arabian Gulf may not remain so. For Youssef Anassar, Abu Dhabi TV, Kuwait.
The suffering of Iraqis living on Haifa Street in the heart of the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, continues due to the curfew that has been imposed on them by Iraqi and American forces. Residents of Haifa Street do not have access to the necessities of life since the attack that was launched in the area last Tuesday. A spokesman from the Iraqi Interior Ministry said that police had retrieved the bodies of 37 unidentified individuals during the last 24 hours, with signs of torture and gunshots that has the thumbprints of death squads.
Iraqi families are going from one catastrophe to the other in this dark period of Iraq's history. They are living through a series of painful experiences at the hands of the terrorist death squads. These martyrs, who were from one single family, were buried in Abu Ghraib area in Baghdad. They have fled to Abu Ghraib area after being forced to leave their homes in the Ghazala. They were forced to leave all their belongings behind, even their basic life necessities. When they eventually had to go back to their homes to bring some of their belongings, they were met by the death squads that committed the most heinous crimes against them. They were all killed, along with their elderly father. In a separate incident, armed clashes erupted in Abu Ghraib when armed groups attacked a checkpoint administered by the Iraqi National Guards. The American occupation forces had to intervene because the clashes were very violent. Military planes were hovering over the site of the incident and imposed a security zone around it. This kept the number of casualties unknown. Meanwhile, the streets of Baghdad have been witnessing a widespread strange phenomenon. Iraqi police have found the bodies of 60 people who were taken by surprise. The police said that most of the bodies were hand-tied and blindfolded with gunshot wounds in the head and chest. Most of the victims were kidnapped by death squads who operate under the cover of the night and take advantage of the imposed curfews because they are allowed to move freely then. Iraqi citizens have been subjected to constant suffering. One security plan comes after the other, but it seems that the only objective behind them is to numb the Iraqi citizens with false hope of security, but in reality it is an illusion.
The 7th annual Herzliya conference on the balance of Israel's national security begins on Sunday. This year's conference will convene amidst the repercussions of the war in Lebanon, regional and international developments, and their implications for Israel's security. One of the central themes of the symposium is Iran. Dr. Uzi Arad, chair of the Herzliya conference, told IBA's Viva Press that to combat the nuclear threat from Tehran, Israel must designate Iran as a priority.
First, there has to be a national decision that this is the first thing, it should come first, and there shouldn't be any other thing that would deviate it from us. Then we should work with the international community, which is now using sanctions and pressure to induce or influence Iran to come to an agreement to freeze all its nuclear-related activities which can lead to military capabilities. We should be part of that effort. But at the same time, should that fail, just as there are American military contingencies, last resort, so they said, so there should be Israeli contingencies. Iran could and should be prevented from becoming nuclear. The repercussions of a nuclear Iran for the stability of the Gulf, for the Middle East, for practically everything, is such that it is worth the effort and even the risks of taking action.
How would you say that Israel-Palestinian relations have changed in the shadow of Iran?
Well, the single most troublesome thing that has happened in the last year is the rise of the Hamas. It's not Iran. Hamas is an indigenous force allied with Iran in some form. But that is what has happened a year ago. And in a way, it has thrown us back to the 50s in terms of the Palestinian positions, which are completely uncompromising. So that is the single most serious problem we have. The fact that Iran is there and the fact that Iran is gathering momentum is making the positions of elements like Hezbollah and the Hamas, and even some among the Israeli Arabs, harden their positions, believing that time is on their side. Well, they should be disabused of that thinking.
You mentioned Hezbollah. Is Hezbollah a greater threat today than it was before the summer's Lebanon war?
It has been a threat, and that threat has not been removed. The trouble is that UNIFIL is not really disarming the Hezbollah, and the Hezbollah is quietly regrouping and forming the threat again. And until such time as that military presence in southern Lebanon is removed, we have a very, very serious problem at our north. Unfortunately, the war in the summer has not dealt with that problem. sufficiently.
In terms of policy making, what do you hope will come out of the Herzliya conference?
Well, the purpose of the Herzliya conference is to bring together the people who decide with the people who know, to converse, deliberate, ponder over policy alternatives. Usually, the result should be just framing the issues, highlighting a few alternative options, informing one another, and possibly affecting both the public debate and the governmental policy making. But let's not exaggerate. Even the government, even the Israeli cabinet, has only about 50% of its resolution being executed. We don't expect even a fraction of that when a conference like Herzliya takes place. It's good while it goes.
An important official in the office of the Prime Minister, Olmert, declared that the Israeli government transferred $100 million to the Palestinian authorities, part of the Palestinian funds that have been frozen by the Israelis. This amount is considered just part of more than $600 million belonging to the Palestinian Authority that have been frozen by Israel since Hamas took over the leadership of the government last March.
These funds belong to the Palestinian people. It is the right of the people and their authority, whether it be president or government, to utilize these funds based on the Palestinian priorities and agenda, so as to reduce the suffering of our Palestinian people. From another view, we demand recovering all the funds that have been frozen by the Israeli occupation and ask that all Arab, regional and world countries intervene by pressing on the Israeli occupation to return these funds.
The European Union Coordinator of External Affairs, Khafia Solana, met today with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah. This meeting between Solana and the Palestinian president is part of an Eastern tour that Solana started in Egypt. It took place on the last evening of talks between Condoleezza Rice and the leaders of the region, which were aimed at reviving the Palestinian-Israeli peace plan. This meeting also comes before the quarterly committee meeting in Washington that will take place at the end of this month.
Israeli Knesset members called on the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and Defense Minister Amir Peretz to submit their resignation because of the defeat that the Israeli occupation army endured in southern Lebanon. They held Olmert and Peretz responsible for the failure to eliminate Hezbollah and stop its missiles from hitting Israeli cities and settlements in occupied Palestine. The calls for resignation came after the Israeli Chief of Staff, Dan Halutz, had resigned amidst ongoing investigations concerning the reasons behind the Israeli defeat.
Calls for the resignation of more senior Israeli officials from both military and political institutions are being made. Those that have been demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and his War Minister Amir Peretz are becoming more vocal. The recent resignation of Chief of Staff Dan Halutz left both Olmert and Peretz vulnerable.
The question is now, what will happen to those who protected Halutz, Amir Peretz, and Prime Minister Ehud Olmert? It will be difficult for them to stay in office after Halutz's resignation, which has paved the way for their resignations.
We must never forget that the responsibility of maintaining security is not only the responsibility of the Defense Department, it is also the responsibility of the government and civil institutions. The Israeli Prime Minister should have resigned after the humiliation of Israel and millions of Israelis. They should have resigned before the Chief of Staff, not after him.
Israeli public opinion has become clearer. According to a poll conducted by Channel 10 of the Israeli occupation television, 69% of the Israelis questioned want to see Olmert resign, and only 26 say that he should stay in office. 85% demand Peretz's resignation, and only 13% said that he should stay as Minister of Defense. Halutz's resignation comes at a difficult time for both Olmert and Peretz. Amir Peretz IsraelIsrael, the president of the Labour Party, is facing crisis in his own party, which may not nominate him in the upcoming elections in June 2007. Halus's resignation was also a blow to Ehud Olmert, who is embroiled in several scandals, including his intervention in a deal to sell Bank Leumi when he was finance minister. The Israeli district attorney demanded a criminal investigation in the scandal only a few hours before the earthquake that was created by Halus's resignation. The district attorney is also looking into accusations that Olmert has appointed close friends in government financial institutions.
تبدأ اليوم في مدريد أعمال مؤتمر دولي بمناسبة مرور.
In Madrid, an international conference began today, marking the 15th anniversary of the 1991 conference that set the framework for the peace process in the Middle East. Even though the first Madrid conference helped begin negotiations between some Arab countries and Israel, its results are still hotly debated.
عاصفة الصحراء تضع أوزارها مع تحرير الكويت. الولايات المتحدة وحلفاؤها يعلنون النصر.
Operation Desert Storm ended with the liberation of Kuwait. The United States and its allies declared victory, while Iraq came out of the mother of all battles, with its army destroyed and an exhausted economy. The Arabs who made an alliance with the United States to expel Iraq from Kuwait are still waiting for promises made by then U.S. Foreign Secretary of State James Baker to be delivered after he toured the region to rally support among Arab countries. Former President George Bush Sr., for his part, called on an international peace conference to be sponsored by the United States and the Soviet Union. On October 30th, 1991, the Arabs and Israel came face to face. Israel, from the official Arab viewpoint, was no longer the invading entity that national songs promised to eliminate and which justified a series of military coups in Arab countries to liberate Palestine. Arabs went to Madrid armed with international resolutions that Israel refused to recognize and accepted a land for peace offer without knowing what land would be returned to them and what kind of peace was awaiting them. Israel refused in the beginning to attend the Madrid conference, but was forced to attend due to American pressure when former President Bush threatened to withhold $10 billion in U.S. aid. Yitzhak Shamir went to the conference and made preparations to embark on a 10-year negotiation strategy that would not involve making any compromises. The Palestinians, who had previously accepted a two-state solution, went for their part with the Jordanian delegate after Shamir refused any independent representation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Ba'athist Syria attended the conference as well after the famous talks that took place between Syrian President Hafez al-Assad and James Baker. On that day, George Bush Sr. addressed the audience, calling for an end to hostilities and a new future. The conference ended with delegates forming dual partnerships, each finding solutions to their problems but with no results. The 1992 Israeli elections saw the Labour Party winning under the leadership of Yitzhak Rabin. With Rabin, negotiations entered a new stage, which finally led to the Oslo Accords. In 1993, the White House witnessed the signing of the Accords and the famous handshake. Jordan, for its part, reached an agreement in 1994 with regard to the Wadi Araba area, which included leasing some Jordanian territories to Israel for 99 years. The assassination of Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 led to a reassessment within Israelis' political ranks. Likud came back into power when Benjamin Netanyahu was elected prime minister in 1996. Then came the Galilee and Wye River agreements, but no change on the ground that could lead to the promised peace took place. Syria, for its part, underwent extensive negotiations, which were halted, then picked back up in 2000 with Ehud Barak. The result was an agreement on 90% of the points raised by Syria and Israel. However, a final settlement was not reached due to disagreement on a few meters along Tabariya Lake. The 2000 Camp David negotiations, which were aimed at ending 15 years of fighting, failed, leaving the peace process at a dead end until another conference, like the one in Madrid, takes place.
Secretary Rice returns to the Middle East for the 8th time in 2 years. Why is Bush's plan winning support from Arab nations? Has Secretary Rice been preparing US allies for what might become the next war? All this and more on Link TV's Mosaic Intelligence Report.
Speak softly and carry a big stick. This is how some Arab commentators have been describing US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice's recent visit to the Middle East. Secretary Rice has wrapped up a Mid-East tour aimed at winning support for President Bush's new Iraq strategy. She hoped to move forward, perhaps even accelerate the roadmap peace plan that was supposed to lead to the creation of a Palestinian state. But her latest visit to Israel and the Palestinian territories has been referred to as a dose of morphine for those who care about this topic. When it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, very little is going to change. The Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert is consumed more with his own political survival than with serious peace negotiations. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, distracted with his internal power struggle with Hamas, has not been able to put his house in order. Also, with 2 years left in office, Iraq will take most of President Bush's energies. So what were the real reasons behind Secretary Rice's recent trip to the region? The rise of Iraq's Shia Muslims alarms many Sunni Arabs. And behind the newly empowered Iraqi Shia, Arabs see the hand of Shia Iran. This Shia revival is perhaps the single biggest unintentional consequence of George Bush's decision to invade Iraq, and is making neighboring states nervous, not only of Iran, but also of the bloodshed on their doorsteps. Iraq has become a base for Sunni extremists who despise Gulf rulers, especially the Saudis. Therefore, the foreign ministers of 6 Gulf states, Egypt and Jordan, concerned that the chaos in Iraq could spread to the entire region, immediately expressed their backing for the deployment of more US troops in Iraq. But as Secretary Rice was making her rounds in the region, the USS John C. Stennis was deployed to the Middle East. This means that 2 US aircraft carriers will now be placed in the volatile Gulf region for the first time since the Iraq War broke out in March 2003. Has Secretary Rice been preparing US allies for what might become the next war? The new strategy Bush referred to in his latest speech is not addressed at Iraq. It is actually a new strategy for Iran. This was the gist of a recent editorial in Qatar's Al-Watan newspaper. In Al-Ahram, the largest Egyptian newspaper, someone wrote, "Those who maintain that the US won't consider launching another war in the region, this time against Iran, are simply fooling themselves. The war is coming." Condoleezza Rice's recent trip has been making everyone nervous, and many have been wondering if there is a real strategy behind Mr. Bush's publicly stated plan. A strategy that many believe reads like a tragedy in the making. I'm Jamal Dajani for the Mosaic Intelligence Report. To learn more about this program or to share your thoughts, visit us at linktv.org/mosaic.
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Feyerdahl Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.